Hey, good day, everyone. I think we're live. September 19th, 2024, and Richard's monkeying around with his camera. Outstanding. We're off to a great start.
I didn't touch it. What happened?
I don't know. It just kind of flashed. You went off and on. I didn't know. Then it said you joined the room. I don't know.
Well.
Okay, there's probably a gremlin in the works. Excellent. I got still some people rolling in. So while they're rolling in, why don't I just go ahead here and I'll let everyone know the topic of today's chat, fireside chat. Slowly, then suddenly, should you be long Bitcoin? And this is going to be quite interesting because Richard's going to dispense some wisdom,
ramble on,
his thoughts. Probably good for some contemplation and maybe even a few laughs.
You'd be laughing at me, not with me.
Same thing. So it's kind of interesting, and this slowly suddenly thing is sort of the way I think major events tend to unfold in general, whether it's a financial event or otherwise. And people have this. I don't know the word for it. Maybe I do, but I can't think of it. This way of knowing something's coming, but just kind of probably not during my lifetime, or probably not this month, or they just get used to it. And all of a sudden when it happens, it's like, oh my God, a shock. It's like, you have a loved one that maybe you know is going to pass, or like when my grandfather was dying, you know he's going to die. It could be any time now, and you've prepared for it. But when it actually happens, it still kind of gives you a bit of a kick in the stomach. And I think that's the way a lot of these things tend to unfold. Let me just, I'm going to stop sharing this because I don't need that up. But first, let's just, this is a good time to remind you, if you want to join us over at roguetrader.academy, please do so, or check out our Patreon at Patreon Rogue Trader Academy. And we do live streams most every weekday, although I didn't do one yesterday because it was pre-Fed announcement and there's no point in doing anything before that, which we'll also talk on. And join us for live streams and live trade alerts and general musings about the market and life and politics and everything else you probably disagree with us about. All right. So what do I want to talk about? So let me share my screen. Let's just get a lay of the land.
You just left the room and came back momentarily.
Did I? Look, my picture's gone all yellowy for a second.
Yeah, I think this webinar jam thing is playing up, but I think we're still here.
Yeah, I think so.
Anyway, are you going to stop rambling on and get on with it? Right,
yeah. And if we're not here, please just let us know in the chat.
Whoa, 62.8.
What?
62,800.
Yeah, it's pushing up, isn't it? It's pushing up. So you can see my screen, right? Yeah.
It's taking me from having to manage puts to managing calls. It's boring.
You're like, please let me manage calls.
And one Friday, I'd love stuff just to go out worthless on both sides, just to give me an easy time.
What is this nonsense you talk about? One thing I was thinking, so this day in history, September 19th, is interesting. Too bad it wasn't September 17th, because Richard and I actually share the same birthday on September 17th, which is sort of a happy coincidence, not that anyone cares. But September 19th, did you know, just before I get started, I read this, it was New Zealand was the first country to have women vote. And, I was just curiously noticing that's probably just coincidental that the world started going downhill from there. I'm just joking, all you girls. I'm just joking, of course. All right, here's the Bitcoin chart. Hey, a nice move up, and we've come right into
that.
This
Reminds me of a great Norm Macdonald joke.
Okay, go ahead.
Where he goes, he tells that sexist joke, and then he says, "No, I'm just, it might surprise you to learn that joke was written by a woman." And then he goes, "No, just kidding. We don't hire women around here."
That's right. Norm Macdonald was brilliant. I love that guy. He was just so deadpan and so wonderful.
Yeah,
died far too young. Bitcoin. Look, we've got this zone that this bar has been here for freaking ages.
We're going to touch 63 on this call.
It looks like it. We're only $40 away from it, so that's kind of cool.
That's insane. Yeah.
And last week I started a long gamma account for those that follow us on Rogue Trader Academy. There's your 63 right there. Where I'm doing long iron condors, and that's all I'm doing, except when I close them and market gets overextended, I'll switch to short gamma. But anyways, I digress a little bit. So basically, we were thinking this is no man's land. It did stop here. And it's not that surprising, but I expected to get some resistance here. If it wants to push up to 64, something redonkulous, you can bet I'll be selling some short-dated calls, probably at the money or near the money. Or, if you want to feel a bit more timid, the 67s will probably be worth some good bucks. Maybe next Friday, that might be a good bet too. But again, not trading advice. That's just what I'll be doing. And if I get hammered by it, you'll know it, and I'll just adjust it. If you make money, please send me 10% of the proceeds.
I was just looking at the liquidation heat map. I think people were preempting this and sold a bunch of risk at 63, which is just all being taken out now by.
Yep, there you can see it right now on my screen. And I was going to mention the heat map because I'd seen quite a bit building up at 61, and I actually just bought some puts as well. Well, of course, I did the long iron condor strategy for the gamma because they were getting really cheap. And I think that you're right that the risk, the fear of the downside risk has much abated right now.
Yeah, we're down to 3% risk reversals at 10 delta now in 1 week.
Mm-hmm. And one other quick thing I'll mention here before we get onto the topic is, yesterday we had a little bit of outflows in Bitcoin ETFs, but geez, we had, 4 days straight of positive inflows. And then, 6 of the last 7 days were positive, which is, kind of nice because it broke the previous pattern of that negativity.
But interestingly, no BlackRock inflows, which I kind of think of as the steady, the one that's the underlying sentiment, whereas the other ones tend to be, in my view, speculative in that the people are using them to hedge MicroStrategy or whatever.
Interestingly, it was just on Monday that I had those inflows, or BlackRock had those inflows, and everything is zero. And I think we've often questioned, is that zero really accurate? I don't know. I really don't know. Look at that, 63,200. Oh my God. So, I sold my 62,000 long calls this morning because I want to lock in some profit. No problem. You can't go broke taking a profit, yada, yada, yada. But I said, well, this week and now going forward, I'm going to double my previous position so I can sell into strength and I can hold the rest for a big move. So I'm quite happy. I think I bought 64 is now my new strike for next Friday. 64, 68 is the spread. So yeah. What else do I want to say about this? I don't think that's, I think that's all I wanted to mention about that. Let me turn my screen share off. All right. So back to the topic, slowly then suddenly. And before the call, we were chatting a little bit about the markets. We're talking about oil. I am long oil. And of course, if you're a member of Rope Trader Academy, you would know that. And I think you've got some of your own thoughts you'd like to sort of mention as part of the slowly then suddenly. So I'm just going to sort of hand the floor over to you and you can sort of chat.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Middle East. I mean, given the recent events in the Middle East, but also previous to that, and the whole petrodollar thing. The alternative news networks are full of, or have always been full of, the whole petrodollar's a scam and the US hegemony and all that. But actually, there's been a kind of a change in the US's position over the past, I guess, 20 years, but more recently 10 years, in that it's definitely become less interested in interfering in the world or policing the world, depending on your point of view. And it's worth mentioning that the probable reason for that is that the US, because of fracking and shale oil, has become self-sufficient in oil. Now, you wouldn't know that if you hear all the people deriding Biden for running down the strategic oil reserves and so on. But there's a shit ton of oil under the US, more than it needs, and in fact, the US is now an oil exporter, which means it no longer has a strong vested interest in defending its interests in the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, which used to be its sort of top-up oil tap. And that means a number of things. It means that the US sort of no longer is so interested in policing the seas, because it doesn't depend on them quite so much as it did. The US is also interestingly looking to move manufacturing back onshore as a security measure, which also means that it's less interested in policing the seas. And that means that countries like Saudi Arabia need to find another protector. So you've seen in the news maybe that Saudi Arabia has been sort of cozying up to China, and interestingly selling oil for yen. Oil for yuan. Which 10 years ago would have probably got it carpet bombed, right? And let's not beat around the bush. That's the reality of the hegemony and the petrodollar. But so in return for protection from the US, you grant the US fealty and your oil.
This is a lot like jailhouse politics, basically.
Yeah, well, I mean that's just politics is politics, right? It's who controls the stuff. And if you look at social media, you'll see people saying this shows how weak the US is because it no longer can control its protectorates. But the reality is that the US, I think, is less interested in controlling where Saudi Arabia sells its oil, and therefore Saudi Arabia can, in quotes, get away with it. But this then leads on to another question about the who needs dollars. Because, of course, American people always need dollars, and countries whose currencies are pegged to the dollar need dollars, such as Argentina now, by the way. And the Middle Eastern currencies are all still pegged to the dollar. But if people don't need to buy dollars to buy that oil, then arguably the demand for dollars will gradually decrease. Now, I don't see any reason that people stop demanding dollars overnight by any means, because we've got USDT, USDC in crypto just because it's so convenient, right? And everything's dollar based. But we are definitely moving into a multipolar world, and these seismic shifts, as per the title, happen slowly and then they happen quickly. For that reason, I'm very happy to be long, shall we say, currency neutral assets. And if you've watched the show before, you'll know that I'm always long gold and own physical gold and don't trust paper gold for a moment. Don't own any of it. And I see Bitcoin as a much more erratic, short-term version of gold. I mean, I know that in the cryptocurrency world, Bitcoin is seen as, electronic gold. End of story. I see it as a proxy for gold with a short shelf life. By short, that could be 5, 10, 20 years. Who knows, right? But for now, it's a sort of a high beta proxy for both gold and excess liquidity. So I would therefore expect positive sentiment going forward on Bitcoin, and therefore it's going to be a horribly volatile, of course, and in my view, crawl up for the time being. And it probably doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong about the long term. My long-term view on Bitcoin is 20 years' time, it's worth zero, right? But because central banks don't want Bitcoin, they want gold. And as evidenced by last year and this year have been record years for central banks buying gold. But whether I'm right or wrong doesn't matter, because the long term doesn't matter to anyone really, because we're all dead in the long run. What matters is the short run that kills you, right? Or determines how you're going to live for the next 20 years. So I think for that reason, I mean, I've stayed long Bitcoin all through this dip, and it's been painful. I've had to, defend positions, buy puts, manage margin. In one account, I had to put some extra cash in just to keep margin, at bay temporarily. But I didn't want to submit this time and reverse direction, because I feel in my water that I've felt in my water. I've said I'm on record as saying second half of September is going to be when Bitcoin starts to recover, and I suspect this recovery will now be sort of the trend for the time being. There is one thing niggling at me at the moment, which is that we've just had a 50 basis point rate cut in the US, but the markets behaved as if rates went up, oddly, or the bond markets behaved as if the 10-year bond actually went down, i.e. 10-year yields went up in response. Whether that was just short-term shifting of durations or I don't know, but that kind of implies, despite dollars getting cheaper, US mortgages and cars getting more expensive, or car loans getting more expensive, at least in the short term. And I thought also interestingly, the yen strengthened. Weakened.
Weakened a bit, yeah.
Weakened, which interested me, because I kind of thought, I don't know, you'd expect lower rates in dollars to be indicative of less value in the carry trade, but then maybe that's all just been hedged in already and priced in.
Yeah, and I'm just looking over at like the pound yen and the Kiwi yen currency pairs, and I didn't. I've been very busy all morning. I haven't looked, but you're right. The yen got really weak again, and I think I'm going to jump in on some trades, and I'll post those trades for our members.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's like a short-term deleveraging action or whether it's people just unwinding speculative trades they had just in case rates were higher or lower.
Yeah, oil up 2% today too. Just before you carry on,
and everything actually.
yeah, it seems like it too. I didn't take a look at the futures this morning, like the S&P. Everything's up. So right now, S&P futures 1.5%, NASDAQ 100 2%. So yeah, it's interesting. ETH up almost 3%.
Interesting.
What I was going to say was I decided to do a little poll, and we're talking about a lot of people are expecting what they call a God candle, like where Bitcoin goes from 68 to 98 or like 120 or just some outrageous that people will look back for years and say, can you believe it? I don't think that's off the table. I still think that might happen, and this is that slowly then suddenly there might be some geopolitical events, everything lines up, and there's a big move and then a panic and then bam, it happens. So my question in the poll is this it? Are we finally going to see the next Bitcoin rally in September, October? Heck yeah, not a chance, and only if Richard shaves off his beard. And so far, 50% of the people think that if you shave off your beard, Bitcoin will have a big rally.
Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. So forget the moon phases, forget burnt animal entrails, reading tea leaves, anything else. Really, your beard is the primary focus there.
Well, I'm short a few calls at the minute, so I'll just wait until I've got rid of those, and then I'll shave.
I think I remember back in the 80s when ZZ Top, the band, remember they had the long straight beards. They were offered, I think, $1 million each. I guess back then it was a lot, or maybe it was more. To shave off their beards by Gillette, but they refused. I don't know if that's urban legend or if it really happened, but I remember that. Okay, so that's the poll. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but is there anything else you want to mention about that before we?
No, I was just seeing this comment by Vladimir about you can own huge company stocks in exchange for gold value in case you want to not hold all your eggs in one basket. That's kind of true. Well, my view on stocks has changed over the years. I used to just see stocks as a barometer of free money or cheap money. I still do, by the way. But there are some stocks that are truly valuable. So in my view, stocks that produce energy are truly valuable because actually all wealth comes from having excess energy. If you look at the history of humanity and the standard of living, it has absolutely correlated with our ability to harness more and more cheaper or more and more energy. Full stop. And so, by any measure, we are all stupendously rich because there's energy everywhere now. And every other. So, and then you've got things like cosmetics and gold. They are valuable for slightly different reasons, but related. So, I think cosmetics and luxuries are essentially bartering or attraction tools for mates and sex, and that's always valuable because humans all gravitate towards mating rights and mating opportunities. And gold, of course, is used for both mating rights and for international stores of value, so that there's value there. So arguably producers of gold that consume energy to produce gold, and companies that consume energy to produce cosmetics and fashion should be valuable going forward. Infrastructure, of course, all necessary, and then almost anything else is just basically worthless and a barometer of how much easy cash there is out there. So that's pretty much all tech, which has done supremely well over the past couple of decades. But this, in my view, is just a symptom of. I mean, tech is basically useless, right? It just makes everyone's life worse, and and we lap it up. And we all buy it. But with any spare credit card, allowance we've got, we buy more tech. But if we didn't have that credit card allowance, we wouldn't. You'd buy food and shelter and warmth and mating rights.
Maybe what we should do is next week we'll just replay Austin Power Gold Member.
Yeah.
And we'll teach people about the value of gold.
Yeah. Vladimir thinks that companies that hold patents on tech are gold value. No, I'd completely disagree, because in the end, the Chinese will just copy it and replace you at cheaper anyway. And no matter what your view on patent law is, you'll buy the cheaper Chinese crap. And also, you'll only buy that crap if you've got spare cash. You'll only have spare cash if the Fed are printing money. And when they stop, or when they're no longer able to print, you're going to be poor. And the only money you're going to have is in the house you live in. That's actually useful. Any second homes will be liabilities, and the gold bars you bought. And maybe the Bitcoin. It depends on how bad it gets.
Yeah. All right. So our poll, I'll close the poll. 42% of people think that the price of Bitcoin is finally going to have a big rally this September, October. 0% say it's not going to rally. So everybody's very bullish, but more people, 57%, think that it's more correlated to your beard. So,
do you remember you saying back in the beginning of the summer when everyone's bullish, buy puts?
Yes. And this morning I bought puts. I bought calls too, but yeah. No, it's and that's the way Bitcoin goes. As you said at the beginning of the call, we've been suffering a little bit since August, watching equity go down on accounts that they're long oriented, long delta, constantly managing short puts. It's a real pain in the backside. And now we're having to manage calls, right? And that's always the way Bitcoin goes, and it starts to get stressful, and you pray that you could manage some puts for a while. Quickly, that prayer goes very, very wrong very quickly, and So
I'm short. You're always shorter calls than you wanted to be if the market rallies, but I'm not as short calls as I might have been, because I was actually willing to run a long delta all through the summer because I just had a feeling,
Yeah, and double covering helps too. If you want to double cover or more in some cases, especially if if you see an opportunity where you think that cover is cheap, then by all means grab it. And it's the few times that it comes into play, it's always worth it. So very, very important. All right, so we're almost at the end of our time. I will mention too in the chat there's a little link if you want to save 10% on deribit fees if you do not have a deribit account. And if you're watching this on YouTube, of course, you can just check the link below and save 10% on deribit tree fees. Any last thoughts here, Richard? And again, if anybody has any questions, please drop it into the Q&A section and we'll get to it.
Well, I mean, if you look at the news of today, the Yahoo Finance front page is just plastered with, basically crowing at the Fed for finally towing the line and lowering rates, like the market told it had to, and all the stories about economic collapse are now all relegated to Twitter, fears of downside, which is interesting, right? Because the infallible rule is to always sell good news. So I've read a few economists who think that there'll be a relief rally and then followed by a reconciliation or a reckoning. And there's a few people who are thinking that the S&P could drop by like 25% over the next 6 months.
I don't disagree with that. And before the call, I was talking about us starting a fund like a proper hedge fund with stocks and using options. Anyways, the point is I remember I was doing my online banking and I saw this little pop-up came up and said, hey, invest here, what's your risk tolerance, and the usual questions. And I was looking at some of the funds they had and how they're oriented and what sectors they're in and all that. And I thought, gosh, could you imagine starting to invest right now? It just seems absurd.
What the hell would you buy? Yeah.
You're asking for the hammering of a lifetime. To me, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the market's going to go up for another 3 years. I don't know, but we're at all-time highs or near all-time highs in the S&P, and the world, everything is crumbling. The United States is a mess. Britain, just forget about it. Europe is a joke. I don't know what to say. And maybe even going back to Vladimir's point about having companies that have tech, and you kind of disagree with that. Now we're seeing rules being bent for political reasons where politics has no goddamn place. And when you talk about the Chinese will probably copy things, well, we all know they do that. A patent is only good as the enforcement behind it. And so if you got that enforcement, great.
I very much believe that we're currently at the the US are putting trade tariffs now on Chinese cars, aren't they? And so are the EU. So trade tariffs are sort of stage 2 in the path to war. The next is economic warfare, and then after that is kinetic warfare normally through proxies first, and then if it gets really serious, between the actual powers. So I very much expect us to see many more proxy wars appearing along the cracks between the two empires. And that's going to make shipping more expensive, and therefore insurance and goods from overseas. And
I was reading a quick little article. So I used to, for a while, I jumped into the Amazon space. There's a lot of money to be made there, and I had some good friends doing it. So I jumped in, and I haven't been doing that for many years now. But I saw an article yesterday, or maybe the day before, talking about how Amazon and maybe Walmart or other big retailers, there's a loophole regarding these trade tariffs if they're sent directly. So basically, your stuff is shipped directly from China versus going to warehousing and all these things. And if it's under a certain value, then it bypasses that. Now, the thing was not so fast. Maybe there's new sets of regulations will deal with that. But I thought, oh my gosh, imagine being a big Amazon seller or and you've invested millions in warehousing and infrastructure and logistics and insurance and everything else those sellers have to deal with at scale, just to have it pulled out, from under your feet by Amazon. And who could be loyal to a company like that? Their greed knows no bounds. No bounds. Sorry, that's a little rant there. We got a quick question from Vladimir. And one more thing I'll mention. So someone mentioned on a YouTube video, a follow-up from last week, Richard, where we talked about turning your worthless dollars into Bitcoin. We were talking about the cross-currency margin system. And someone said, hey, it's not cash settled, it's settled in BTC. I want to clarify, yes, it's cash settled, but the currency is BTC.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of confusing the
You could think of it as cash settled in dollars, but before they give you the dollars, they convert them to Bitcoins.
Makes total sense. It's clear as mud, really. So,
yeah.
Vladimir has a quick question here. Last week, I asked you which size of positions you think that's reasonable to buy when we're at the bottom of a range. And now I finally realized that what you can actually do is spend 25% of total profits, which were received while we're not around bottom of range. With this strategy, you'll always be long or short just in time.
Okay. No, well, maybe Vladimir's found an edge here. We'll try.
That Vladimir's always thinking.
Yeah.
I think that maybe he thinks too much. Yeah, he's always looking for an angle.
No, it's good. I mean, that's the only way you find the angles. It's by looking, right?
You got to keep poking until something gives. So, let us know how that goes. Yeah. All right. I think any last questions, please post them. I know today might not.
Problem is that what I've said is probably everyone on the call is in agreement with what I've said, so no one has any questions.
Or they disagree with you so vehemently.
Yeah,
that they just don't even want to start an argument. Yeah, very political. Yeah, fantastic. Well, we've reached the bottom of the hour, anyways. Thanks again for joining us, everyone. Check us out at roguetrader.academy if you want to hang out with us sort of from Monday to Friday. Other than that, let's see what happens until next week and see if we get that big rally. Maybe next week we'll be up at 68 or 70. Wouldn't that be interesting if we're starting to get near all-time highs again? I'm sure a lot of people would be pretty damn happy. So let's see what happens this week, and we will catch you next Thursday.